out here outside of Prague Central Station, and I'm on my way to see the great man himself, former President Václav Klaus, who has been a hero of mine for many, many years, not just because of his ideas, which can be classified as classical liberal, but also for his feistiness, his fighting spirit, his willingness to speak, as the progressives say, truth to power. Let's see what he says to me today.
Thank you for joining me.
Yeah.
Thank you for accepting this request for this interview.
Thank you. Thank you for coming to Prague.
I've taken a look at your many interviews over the years and your many speeches and your writings, and there's so much I'd like to ask you. I think we share a lot in terms of vision and concern about Europe. Let's start with concerns about Europe. In 2006, I believe it was, a long time ago, you expressed concern about the direction of Europe. Has this concern abated? Has it increased? Where are we now?
Well, definitely, it has increased. My concern has increased visibly since, let's say, 2006. I just always try to correct the terminology a little bit. I always differentiate strictly Europe and the European Union. So to speak about Europe is one thing, to speak about the European Union is another thing. So let's make it. For me, European Union is an political agent in the theory of politology. Europe is not an agent. Europe is an entity evolved during centuries and millennia. So I don't like to make very strong views, formulations about Europe. So I take it more politically.
I understand that. And I've heard this before, people who reject this category, this construct called Europe. We could say that you are Central European, but it's difficult to say you're European unless you're in Asia, perhaps, or Micronesia, right?
It's absolutely perfect. I more or less never use the term European for myself. I have one example in New Zealand or in Bolivia. Definitely I am a European, and sometimes it's even difficult. I remember I was once skiing in the Rocky Mountains somewhere and in Vail, and I got a ski instructor. The organizers of a conference offered me a guide to show me all the interesting slopes, and he asked me from where you are, and I understood that it's even difficult to describe to that guy, Czech Republic. He didn't know that, Then he was able to hear Prague was something, and his point, 19 years old guy, ski instructor, his point was, this is the place where Rolling Stones were recently playing, This is absolutely tragic. So centrally, I am possibly able to talk about Central Europe, but not about Europe. For me, the countries Finland, Portugal, Ireland, and Cyprus are so far from here that I wouldn't say that Cyprus is closer to me than Egypt, and Portugal than Morocco, and Finland than Kazakhstan. Really difficult to say.
Exactly. You're evoking that lovely, beautiful diversity of nations that we really used to appreciate and defend. I don't think we live in that kind of world anymore, and now everything is becoming more and more homogenized.
Yeah.
And in part, I would say that it's because of the efforts of political institutions like the EU institutions that this is happening. So let's talk about the EU. This monstrosity, as some have said, this socialist experiment, as others have said, continues lumbering forward. We're looking at elections in June. It continues to grow, it seems. They're always passing new resolutions or directives. And those countries that do not abide by what the EU says, like Hungary and Poland, then get accused of rule of law violations. So what are we talking about regarding the EU? Is this a superstate, a supranational entity that cannot be stopped? Or can we reasonably talk about reform of the EU institutions? Is there such a thing?
First, you correctly say that the recent attacks on Poland on the one hand and Hungary on the other. Of course, there are no attacks on Poland where Mr. very European guy, Mr. Tusk, became the prime minister. Then Poland is the most loved country by the Brussels bureaucracy. So that's evidently. When I was prime minister and president, the bad guy was the Czech Republic, of course, because for many things I tried to do and I did, especially in resisting the Lisbon Treaty. We were the main troublemakers at the time. Poland and then Hungary didn't say anything. So there's a moving criticism geographically. I have problems to explain it. I was prime minister who sent a letter asking for EU membership. It was in 1996 in a post-communist country, recently free, recently reborn, simply to say that people were not able to differentiate Europe and the European Union. And there was no chance to explain to the Czech citizens that you don't want to enter the EU because at that moment, the meaning of that means that who is your friend in Europe? Mr. Lukashenko in Belarus or Mr. Milosevic in Yugoslavia. So we had no other chance. So I sent the letter. I brought it, by the way, because there was a rotating EU presidency, Italy, and Prime Minister Dini was the boss of the EU at that moment. So I flew to Brussels, to Rome, and brought there the question, the application for membership. I was president of the country who signed the membership treaty, so I am responsible. Nevertheless, I didn't have a chance. I could resign in both cases, but any other Czech politician who would follow me would immediately sign the EU membership. So nevertheless, I have been criticizing the EU since the first moment in my political life, and we will celebrate in quotation marks, the 20 years of our membership in 2 months' time. And we decided in our institute to put together, with a very nice introduction of my colleague, Jiří Weigl, we put together 60 articles written mostly by me and by my colleagues, and to publish day by day the old articles, 1990 to 93 and so on. We published about the EU, always very critical ideas. So for me, this is part of my life, to my great regret.
You said that it was difficult to tell the voters back then not that we shouldn't join the EU. Today, do you think politicians should be telling voters that we should leave the EU?
Well, difficult to answer this question. I always explain especially to people from Western Europe, that in the moment of the fall of communism here in Prague, in the Velvet Revolution, there were slogans on the streets, back to Europe. back to the meaning of that slogan at that moment was, we want to be, after 40 years of communism, again, a normal European country. It was not telling anything about the European Union, which, by the way, still 3 years didn't exist. It was still the European Community. But back to Europe. And I was the first man in this country who tried to stress, pay attention, look, back to Europe doesn't mean, and now to use your language, the Italian language, meant something else than avanti into the European Union. I was the only one in the ex-communist world who would very early say that difficult to explain to the citizens of Central European countries.
Right.
I have to stress that.
And some citizens, some people don't want to hear it. They just don't want to, they close their ears. So from my perspective, as you know, I try to keep my eyes and ears open as to what's happening across this thing that we're calling Europe, Western, Central, Eastern. And one of the things I detect is that you have, on the one hand, global governance structures, multilateral structures that are causing all sorts of problems, of course. And then we have what you called, I think, camouflaged communists here and there. They used to be, maybe some of them were liberals, but today they're really Greens and environmentalists. I see them as taking up the cause of communism under a different form, under a different guise. I see those two things, the multilateral structures and then these camouflaged communists, as two of the major threats facing all countries in this continent. How do you see it?
Well, you know, I try to keep, because of what we experienced for 40 years in the communist era. I must say that this year I am so old, still that the majority of my life was in the communist era, 2/3, you know. So I still try to keep the term communist for communism in the old meaning of the term.
In the traditional sense.
In the traditional sense, and I am not eager to somehow to use it for everyone who is against. You know, that would be the same mistake as the other side of the ideological barricade is using. Fascist is, for them, almost everyone who says something different from what Madame Ursula von Leyen dreams about, you know, during her dreams, I expect. You know, so we, all of us, oppose using the term fascist for anyone who disagrees with the official doctrine of the European Union. I think we shouldn't make the same mistake, you know. But what is missing, we don't have a common term, a summary, which would substitute using the Greens, the multiculturalists, the COVIDists, the genderists and the human rightists and so on and so on.
What are they then? Are they the planners? They want to plan our lives according to health or
also for
economics?
Me, you may with your background, the life background, you know, you may use the term planners, but yesterday I was teaching my course at the Prague Economic University here about the transformation, which explains both the past and the transformation and the current era. Again, for me to talk about planning and central planning is such a fixed term in the thinking of an economist that, again, to use it for us, the planners were some specific people who and so on. We try to explain everyone that central planning is a nonsense. It has never functioned because it's not possible to have all the necessary information at the top and the Hayekian arguments and so on. And you have interests which kill the central planning. So again, planners is not for us in this part of the world. Is not a good term. Maybe in America you can use it, but not here.
Understood. So let me ask you the following. I have many classical liberal and libertarian friends. They're convinced that we can move away from the kind of dirigism or planning mentality that we've seen emerge and spread around the world. I'm not so optimistic. I firmly believe that we're all Keynesian. We're all living under Keynesian kind of mechanisms and apparatuses. What is your view?
Well, you say I am not optimistic. I am, on the one hand, Germans say optimismus ist Pflicht. Optimism is an obligation, or how to put it in English, But in this respect, I'm not an optimist. And one thing is generally looking at where the world and Europe is moving, and I am especially not very optimistic about this country, And I have 2 days ago I gave to the editor my small book, more or less economic, after a long time, not just to speak about such messy and soft terms which are used in politological thinking about the economy. And my idea is it can't be saved by partial parametric changes. There must be again a systemic change. We have again to make the market possible to function. We have to eliminate all kinds of regulation and so on and so on. I explained to my students yesterday what was the substance of the transition here after the fall of communism. And I told them, young people, 20, 22 years old, liberalization, and I explained to them what it meant. Deregulation, de-etatization. The third was de-subsidization. And the form and the force is privatization, of course. And I explained them, especially because in Czech, the de-subsidization is not a term normally used in Czech language. And they looked at it, and I explained to them that the substance of the communistic society and economy was the subsidies. Subsidies, all kinds of that things in different forms,
And transfer payments and all these other things, right?
Everything, and they were really shocked. And I argued that now I think I gave to the publishing house a book of mine when the de-subsidization is the main task of our society, of our government these days. So that's not a good reason for being optimistic, because I'm afraid that we used a special, after November 89, we used a special window of opportunity, because the people were really frustrated with communism and were ready to make a change. They wanted to live in a different world. Plus, we had a window of opportunity because of the international situation. America, United States, more or less started not to be very active in world politics after the fall of communism. Germans were our main neighbor. Germans were totally occupied with their own Wiedervereinigung, reunification. Russia, Soviet Union was weak, not able to do anything, and European Union still didn't exist. It was still the European Community, and main thing was that we were not members at that moment. So we were relatively free, which can't be repeated in any meaningful sense. To create such an artificial construct of having such freedoms, I can't imagine, and to do the same radical reforms, changes, which we did in the months and weeks, months, not almost years, but even at shorter moments, I'm absolutely sure that they would, Ursula would send here a contingent of soldiers from Brussels or from somewhere, to tell us no. So that's the reason for my not simple optimism.
I share that. I mean, so you're talking, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity that history gave us, and it can't be artificially repeated or mimicked, because we don't know what history will bring, and men can't create the conditions in which such changes, such systemic changes can be implemented. So I share your pessimism. And
but
what's
I
interesting...
wouldn't call it I refuse to call it pessimism. I said it's realism, yeah. And instead of using optimist, pessimist, so I speak about naivist or realist. So I am definitely not a naivist, and
Understood.
Maybe that's even more interesting to use those labels.
I'll keep that in mind for future conversations. My final comment, just to follow up on your last reply, I find it interesting that no matter who I talk to in Europe and also in the United States, people are all realizing that a systemic change is necessary. What they don't necessarily realize is that the conditions today are so constraining, so limiting, that it's probably going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to have a systemic change of the kind we need. And that leads to certain scenarios that are troubling. And I don't think I will ask you to comment on that, because those scenarios are, unfortunately, scenarios of instability.
Scenarios of instability. You use without hesitating, as I see, the term systemic change.
Yes.
I have in my book, which I just completed, I express openly a problem with using the term systemic change, because, we considered our rebuilding of communism and introducing the parliamentary democracy in the political sphere and the market economy in the economic sphere. That was for me a meaningful use of the term systemic change. And when I say that we have to restart political pluralism and the parliamentary system in an old-fashioned sense, and we had to somehow to reinvigorate or something the market economy, I really hesitate to use. I am using the term systemic change, but some of the first friends who read my manuscript say, well, but you were the main person who used the term systemic change in November 1989. You use it. It's for me a good sign that I can use it as well. But it's a systemic in some sense, subsystemic change, because everyone would say that you have a sort of market economy. And I try to explain in my book that it's not the case that the market economy is or is not. There is a degree of repression, suppression of the market economy, and so on. So that's a terminological problem a little bit with using the term systemic change. But what I want to say is a fundamental change of our system, and because I very often provoke some people here, then in many respects, we now in March 2024, we are in many respects, both in the strictly political term and in the strictly economic term, returning to something what was not communism in the 1930s in Soviet Union and what was not communism in Czechoslovakia in the 1950s. But I think the late communism in the 1980s is already something close to what we experience now. Again, the people are afraid of telling the children something, ask them, please don't say it at school, and so on and so on. They are not free to criticize anything. They can easily lose their job and so on. That's something what reminds me the communist era. So
I think you're absolutely right there. And let me finish with the following statement, that it reminds me of a study that someone recently did, diagnosing what's happening across the world, particularly Western Europe and the Anglosphere, where this person said we're seeing the psychology of totalitarianism emerge, not in the sense that we've always associated totalitarianism in the 20th century, but a new form where people are afraid, as you said, to express their opinions, to question authority, and to question what our ruling elites are telling us. I think this is terrifying.
It's terrifying, and we see it every day. You go to a restaurant and have a lunch and speak with someone, and he starts to speak looks around, and I say, well, I don't hear well. You should speak louder. No, I don't want to say it so loud, and I start to shout. We didn't do it in the communist era. We considered that even at that moment we can speak loudly in the Czech pubs, drinking beer and criticizing the regime. And now you are afraid. They are afraid, which is a proof. It's a demonstration that something has radically changed.
President Klaus, thank you for your time and this conversation. We hope to come back again.
Please, you are always welcome in our institute.